Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Brandt, and our guest today is Dave Aronberg, the state attorney for the 15th Judicial Circuit serving Palm Beach County. He is a White House fellow and former Florida state senator and assistant attorney general. Throughout his outstanding career, he has focused upon criminal justice and consumer protection issues and has brought accountability and justice in areas including identity theft, economic crimes, and Holocaust restitution. Mr. Aronberg will update us on current issues following these messages.
Life Extension Foundation was established in 1977 and has grown to become the world's largest consumer-based anti-aging organization. Life-saving achievements taken for granted today were pioneered by Life Extension Foundation decades ago. Life Extension is currently funding $10 million a year in research on significantly extending a healthy human lifespan. Diseases that once plagued humanity have largely been eradicated by scientific innovation. 3 leading causes of death in 1900 compared with how people die today. Smallpox killed millions before it was eliminated in 1979. Life Extension funds research to fight biological aging so that it also will become a relic of the past. Log on to lifeextensionfoundation.org.
Anywhere else, this would be a vacation on the Mediterranean. But here, it's also a journey into history. From modern Tel Aviv to the ancient cities of Herod, the Romans, the Crusaders. The history of Israel lives in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful. A miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical.
And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable. Oh, intellectual, cynical.
Find magic again. Sprout by HP. With Intel RealSense technology inside, now you can bend the rules of creativity outside.
With us now is Dave Aronberg. Dave, it's a real pleasure and privilege to be with you again on the show.
Great to be back on your show, Richard.
Interesting times we're experiencing in the world today, and of course locally in Florida and nationwide. One of the things that really troubles me is this current situation of law enforcement being singled out for violence, attacks, criticisms, and so forth. What do you think?
Law enforcement has an incredibly difficult job. You know, the men and women of law enforcement leave work every day not knowing if they're going to see their families again, because their job is inherently a dangerous one, and they do it to protect us and our country, our state, our local government. It depends on people complying with the law, and so law enforcement has a crucial role in making our society go and allowing us to raise our families in a peaceful environment. Everyone, though, has a right to protest, and the First Amendment guarantees that right. And so, you know, I think that if people have an issue with our office, with law enforcement, it is their right to speak up. They can have peaceful protests. That's fine. That's very American. It is not American, though, to commit violence in doing so. So, peaceful protest, absolutely, it's as American as apple pie. But when it crosses over to actual violence, then that is a crime in itself, and that's something that our society doesn't tolerate.
What is being done or should be done to improve community relations in general?
One thing that we've done is that we have reached out to community leaders, churches, lots of institutions before any problem occurred, because what we saw in Ferguson and other places around the country was that you saw a clash between police and the protesters, and I think it started with a distrust, a mistrust that's out there that could have been alleviated if there was better communication in advance. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to reach out before something occurred. And that's why when you saw we had an officer-involved shooting that was very controversial here in this community, which is ongoing, which is why I can't discuss the specifics of it, but it's a pending matter. But we were having meetings with community leaders before that ever occurred. And so when that occurred, this community ended up in what I thought a very constructive dialogue and not violence, because I think we laid the groundwork in advance with people of the community who really cared about protecting the community. And so I think we have done a decent job at that, and hopefully other communities are doing the same.
Critics of this situation think it isn't really anything more than a feigned outrage and a pretext for hooliganism.
Well, we should be careful with our labels, because some people would deem peaceful protest as that, and that's wrong. You know, when it crosses over into violence, that's when there's a problem, and that's something that I don't think anyone really wants. You have outside agitators who will come in to try to stir up violence in some cases, and that's something we need to protect against. It's important to get in advance, to communicate, to have meetings, to understand that the experience of members of our community is different than a lot of our own experiences. We need to listen to them. We need to understand them. And I respect the right of anyone to peacefully protest, and that's something that is protected under our Constitution. And it's also important for us to walk in another person's shoes, to be able to see things from their own life experiences. And I think both sides haven't really spoken and communicated like they should in the past. And I think hopefully one good thing that's come out of this national dialogue is the fact that people are speaking about these issues of race and issues of law enforcement, and hopefully we can be a better society because of it.
I had the privilege of doing an interview with Alveda King, Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Martin Luther King, one of the people I really admire in the history of this country. And there are, of course, many people and initiatives out there that want to bring and bridge gaps in different groups, and I think that's essential and most important. What other challenges are you dealing with here at the State Attorney's Office?
Well, the challenges we face on a daily basis is stemming from the fact that we're living at a time of limited budgets, and where there is a growing population, and therefore we have to do more with less. We have to try to make sure our 3 to 5 year lawyers in this office, the prosecutors we've trained and who now are coming into their own, don't leave for private sector money when they can get paid 3 times as much as they can in our office. Starting attorney, starting prosecutor in our office gets paid $40,000 a year, which is much lower than scale in the private sector. But they do it because they love this job, they love justice, they love being able to serve the community on a daily basis. So that's something that is a challenge that we face every day, is after 3 to 5 years, when they're starting to perhaps have a family, or loans are coming due from college and law school, and it's tough to turn down a 3-fold increase in your salary that a private firm is offering you. So that's why that's probably the greatest challenge in this job, is how to keep our good 3 to 5 year lawyers. That's generally the period when they start to leave.
Nevertheless, it is said that you're doing a fantastic job here, and your entire staff. The achievements of your office are spectacular, I'm told.
Well, thank you for saying that. I love this job. We've been able to increase our conviction rate, lower our juvenile direct file rate. That's the rate at which juveniles are direct filed into adult court. We've been able to, I think, increase morale in the office and keep people longer, and hopefully be an office that Palm Beach County residents can be proud of, because the job of a prosecutor is not necessarily to convict in every case, it is to do justice, and there is a difference. We've done a much better job at raising our conviction rates, but ultimately it's about doing justice, seeking the truth, and acting professionally on a daily basis.
This is most interesting, and I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these commercial messages. We'll be right back. We're back with Dave Aronberg. Dave, a question I'd like to ask you with regard to community and health. There is an allegation that the federal government has an inappropriate overuse of regulation with regard to medical practices. The concern is that innocent Americans are prosecuted and there's just too much overregulation by the government. What's your thought on that?
Well, the question speaks to the federal government, and this office is the Office of the State Attorney. So we prosecute violations of state law. As far as the federal government, you'd have to ask the U.S. Attorney's Office or the FBI, who would be investigating such things, or one of the federal agencies such as the agencies that govern Medicare, which is a federal program. But we, in this office, we focus on state crimes, and so that wouldn't be applicable to us.
One of our main sponsors, Life Extension Foundation, has been researching alternative cures and is in the forefront of many of those. And Life Extension publishes medical protocols advocating for innovative therapies to better treat lethal diseases. But almost all of the physicians refuse to prescribe them because they fear losing their licenses. Is your office required to prosecute doctors who may be instituting the right to try type medications and treatments?
Well, our office prosecutes cases that are first vetted through law enforcement. So what happens is a law enforcement agency will investigate a case. In case of a doctor who would be committing a crime, it'd have to be, for example, when we went after the pill mills, if a doctor was violating the law by, instead of just handing out medication, it was more like he was drug dealing, where he went far and beyond his practice, the medical guidelines, to distribute or prescribe immense amount of oxycodone, for example. That could be a crime. So law enforcement would then investigate. They would then determine whether probable cause exists and then turn it over to us. Or they could work with us and walk it over to us if there's a question about whether enough evidence exists, and then we can make the final filing charge. But ultimately, we will file cases brought to us from law enforcement. So in this case that you bring up about a doctor, first a law enforcement agency would have to investigate to determine whether probable cause exists that a crime has occurred. And without knowing more about it, I wouldn't be able to comment on it.
Speaking of health and rehabilitation, I understand that there is a question with regard to sober homes, otherwise known as halfway houses. Tell us about this.
Well, sober homes are halfway houses, transitional living facilities that are tied to a treatment center. Sometimes they're independent, but ultimately they get a person who had already gone through treatment, drug treatment. Oftentimes it's heroin, because that's a big addiction these days in our community. And before they go out into the real world again, after they've gone through a period of treatment, they live in a sober home, and that eases their transition into society. The problem is a lot of these sober homes have an illegal relationship with the treatment centers through illegal kickbacks or benefits that they're not supposed to get. Instead of being independent and they're not regulated, and there's no way to keep track of them, and there's no certification, mandatory certification. So you're dealing with some unsavory individuals who are opening up these homes in neighborhoods like yours and mine, and letting ex-addicts pretty much go back on their addiction, seeing them as a commodity to where they are incentivized to relapse. And it's not about getting people healthy, it's about making money off them. Now, there are legitimate sober homes out there. There are ones who are there to help make sure people get well. But we have seen too many of them have these insidious relationships with money-making enterprises and the treatment program, something called an IOP or treatment facility itself. There's lots of acronyms here. I don't want to get too convoluted here. But what we're trying to do is to separate the good ones from the bad ones. And you have seen so many open up in our community. We don't know how many there are because there is no regulation of them. So we're going into a field that is relatively uncharted here in Florida to try to prosecute the wrongdoers in this area, try to save lives by helping those who need help and prosecuting those who would turn these people at the lowest point of their lives back into addicts again, taking their money, leaving them out to dry, and also hurting our communities by opening up these places, multi-family homes in single-family neighborhoods. So we're trying to ultimately, like we always do justice, protect the innocent, and prosecute the guilty.
In your career, you've been involved with many important initiatives, including the rights of Holocaust survivors. Please share with our audience a little of that.
Well, I used to work on something called the Holocaust Insurance Project. It was something in Florida that Bill Nelson helped spearhead, who was the insurance commissioner at the time. He worked with insurance commissioners from all 50 states to investigate European insurance companies that stole policies from victims of the Holocaust. It was the largest consumer fraud in the history of the world. And it was something I did at a young age as a young lawyer, and it changed my life. After I worked on that project, I couldn't go back to the big law firm and bill hours for big corporations, so I decided to go into public service full time. I went to work for the Attorney General's office, and that led to ultimately where I am now as state attorney. I decided to dedicate my life to public service.
And not only for the Jewish community, but for all members of the community.
Correct. You know, when one member of the community is scammed, it affects everyone, especially if they're scammed by large multinational insurance companies that counted on the fact back then, before World War II, that the victims, the Holocaust victims, would never return. And so they collected premiums every day. And then after the war, when the families were destroyed and decimated, the survivors would come back asking for payment on the insurance policies, and the insurance agents would say, "Who are you? I don't remember you." And then, "Show me a death certificate for your father or mother." Of course, as you know, Hitler didn't distribute death certificates in the concentration camps. So this is something that it's for the morality of humankind to do something about this. You can't allow this kind of injustice to continue when there's an ability now through the courts, through regulation, insurance commissioners, to do something about it. And so we were able to do something about it and restore a measure of justice to the victims of the Holocaust.
So important never to forget any injustices that are perpetrated in this world. Another thought that came to mind is that of identity theft. What's being done with that regard? What's happening?
We have a white-collar division here that goes after identity theft. It continues to be a problematic crime. It's getting more sophisticated. You've seen recent scandals involving the Russians hacking into political computer systems to try to influence an election. Well, you see that international governments, Chinese, the Russians, have done that also for profit motivations, intellectual property. They can steal bank accounts. There's so much out there now. That's why it is a world where you need to be really careful whom you're giving your personal information to. Change your passwords when you can. Use numbers and not easily thought of passwords. Use the numbers and exclamation points if you can, and number signs and things to try to keep the identity thieves off guard, because you need to stay one step ahead of these guys, because ultimately they'll catch up to us if we make it easy for them to steal our identity.
Before we conclude, share with our audience what your current priorities are.
Well, our priorities have always been going after violent crimes, gangs, habitual criminals. Lately, though, we have noticed a dramatic increase in heroin addiction and overdoses and deaths. And so what we're doing is we have formed 3 task forces to go after heroin abuse and, as it relates to the treatment industry, the abuses in the treatment industry, which helps fuel this heroin crisis. Instead of people getting well, as I said earlier, people are relapsing because there's a profit motivation to get people back into the whole rehab cycle. There's too much money to be made. So we have these task forces, and we're working with law enforcement to identify the wrongdoers in the treatment industry and to shut them down and to prosecute. And that's what we're doing. We are about to really launch some prosecutions of some of the worst players in this industry. We have these task forces that are ongoing, and they've been very, I think, helpful with a leader named Al Johnson, Chief Assistant, who has been leading these task forces, and I think we're going to make a real difference. I think as a result of our efforts, you will start to see us turn the corner in the fight against the rogue sober homes and treatment centers and heroin addiction in our community. I think you're going to start to see some changes for the better. Hopefully that'll be soon.
Dave, you absolutely are an inspiration to so many. A real pleasure to have you with us again, and I'd like us to come back again in the future and catch up.
Thank you, Richard. It's an honor to be here with you and to be on the show with your viewers. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Sometimes we find ourselves wondering, what type of person will they become? How will their future be? Will they care? With all of the voices that await to tear them down, if we don't teach them, how will they ever find it within themselves? I am Casey Lee, and I'm here to make a difference in the lives around me. And I go into elementary schools and really just kind of introduce to them what values are and how they can incorporate that in their lives.
Anyone know what a value is?
When I go into schools, I bring a board and we kind of talk about what the values are and how they can relate that to their lives.
What type of thing do you think about when you think of a team?
And then we play a game and we roll a dice and we pick a number, and once we have that number, we look at that value. And they draw them a picture, they write that value on a piece of paper, and then they get to give that value to the person that means the most to them.
That's right. R-E-S-P-E, and then a C, and then a T.
Something that I've done since I was a very little girl to remind myself of the values and the person that I want to be is I have words all over my room, and they say believe and inspire and hope and dream, and all of these words that I want to remind myself to do.
This value is love.
I think society right now really needs compassion and needs these values. Well, I think teaching values to your children first starts by example, being that type of person for them to model themselves after, and also incorporating a value of the week and trying to be that at home, and whether it be responsibility, so you're picking up after yourself after you have dinner or in your room, making it visual, making it something they can put their hands on instead of just lecturing them or telling them about this, and just making values fun.
That's right, when you work together.
And I think that if people would just try, it doesn't cost any money, it doesn't cost anything to just try and make yourself a better person. And I believe if they tried that, then they would truly see a difference. Sometimes we find ourselves wondering, what type of person will they become? How will their future be? Will they care? With all of the voices that await to tear them down, if we don't teach them, how will they ever find it within themselves?
This brings us to the end of our show for today. I'm Maya Brandt, and thank you for being with us.